Chapter 161, Exam Week. He hadn't meant to get so close to the Malfoy household. The Malfoys were an unpredictable lot, and when the Dark Lord returned, Draco would almost certainly be forced, whatever he thought, under Lord Voldemort's protection. Being associated with them was trouble, and Dumbledore would likely disapprove. Still, Ed could accept the galleons Draco had given him. Money had been tight lately. His coins were nearly gone. That sum would cover his tuition for next year. As his magical skill improved, there were more and more expenses: materials, advanced textbooks, research supplies. Hagrid could help with some things, but for proper research and books, Ed needed cash of his own. The 1,000 galleons Draco had handed him solved that immediate problem. Out of principle, Ed set aside 100 galleons and distributed shares to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The three of them insisted they didn't want any, but Ed argued they had contributed to the incident in their own way. Even if they'd been more of a hindrance than a help, they had still acted. By Ed's rule, anyone who'd witnessed or helped, no matter how little, deserved a cut. Besides, he told them, it's Malfoy's money. You'd be foolish not to take it. That convinced them. Ron, who had never seen so many galleons at once, was stunned and at a loss for how to spend it. New robes or a new wand. Ed wanted to suggest a wand, but that was Ron's decision. Even though he wasn't a first year, a Hogwarts student buying a first wand from Ollivander still got a discount. 7 or 8 galleons could buy a decent wand, and the rest would cover robes or whatever else he wanted. The production of Ed's monster book had reached its final stages, but he forced himself to stop. Exam week was coming. Patrols around Hogwarts increased, and even Ed couldn't find the time to slip to the room of requirement to finish the book. The heat climbed as the exams approached, and the students grew more frantic. Penelope hadn't come around much. As a 5th year, she was facing OULs, and that worry consumed her. Ed could only wish her luck. The sun made everyone irritable, but the real heat was in the exam halls. The students regretted not paying more attention in class and spending more time studying instead of playing Quidditch. Most exams weren't a problem for Ed. Some professors even set amusing tests. Not everything was as soporific as History of Magic, where Professor Binns could put a whole class to sleep. After the written portion of Charms class came a practical exam arranged by Professor Flitwick. Each student had to enter the classroom alone and use the charms they'd learned to make a pineapple tap dance across a desk. As Flitwick's star pupil, Ed was naturally summoned first. Prepared and amused, Ed waved his wand. The pineapple in front of him sprouted feet and slipped into tiny boots. Hands formed at its sides, and a small guitar, transfigured skillfully, appeared in them. A mouth split across the fruit's plump surface, and the pineapple began an exaggerated tap routine while strumming and singing. It crossed the desk, set the guitar down, bowed to Professor Flitwick, and then, surprisingly, transformed back into a large pear and lay still on the desk. "Excellent, Ed," Flitwick beamed, lavish with praise. "Impeccable, impeccable." Full marks, of course. Flitwick's high, excited voice carried beyond the classroom. Even those waiting outside heard his congratulations. He leaned toward Ed and winked. "Then I wish you a happy holiday in advance." "Thank you, Professor. You have a pleasant holiday, too," Ed replied with a smile, then left to make way for the next student. Those waiting outside didn't know the exact exam requirements. They only heard Flitwick's loud approval. Before anyone could quiz Ed, Malfoy included, Flitwick called in the next candidate. Malfoy tried to ask Ed about the task, but Ed refused politely. "Cheating on exams is not a good habit, Draco," he said, patting Draco on the shoulder to show he couldn't help. At first, the other students thought the exam must be easy after Ed's performance. Then the second student emerged, tears cutting tracks through his exam face, and the waiting group's expressions shifted. A chill ran through them all at the thought of what the charm's practical might require. Chapter 162. The exam ended successfully. One after another, the young wizards filed into the classroom with confidence and left with long faces. Professor Flitwick, normally extremely gentle, had shown no leniency for finals. Even his demeanor hardened when grading. Professor McGonagall was no different. For Transfiguration, she required every student to transform a mouse into a vanity box, neat, elegant, and completely free of any mouse features. Any whisker, tail, or hint of fur meant failure. Ed's real challenge was guessing what would satisfy McGonagall's exacting standards. Maybe she'd prefer a cat-shaped box? He paused to think, then flicked his wand. The mouse became a polished vanity box engraved with the Hogwarts crest. The surface subtly showed the textures of 4 different animals, each rendered so lifelike that McGonagall's eyes narrowed in clear approval. It was obvious he'd earned full marks. He left the classroom to the envious looks of his classmates. None of them could perform transfiguration that cleanly on the first try. For most of them, it would take many attempts to approach what Ed had done in a single smooth motion. Potions was no gentler. Snape had warned that whoever brewed the worst potion would be made to drink it, a threat that turned many faces ashen. He stalked between the benches, expression darker than usual, glaring at every mistake. When he reached Ed, he paused only a moment, snorted, and walked away without inspecting his work. Ed didn't mind. He'd had special tutoring from an 18-year-old Snape. If Severus was still dissatisfied, there was nothing more to be said. Ed finished his potion without difficulty. His brewing drew on a lot of alchemical knowledge, and apart from history of magic, where Professor Binns hadn't really taken notice, Ed's performance in every subject looked impeccable to their teachers. Snape, who usually dismissed Ed's work as by the book, nothing new, couldn't help finding flashes of brilliance in Ed's technique. There was something of a master's air in his movements and in the little adjustments he made. Reminders, Snape thought unwillingly, of himself at that age. Of course, Snape would never admit it aloud. Instead, he barked an order for Ed to leave the classroom. He never announced a grade, but from the look on his face, Ed guessed it couldn't be bad. Snape wouldn't mock him like that if he were going to fail him. Unless everyone else's top marks were only acceptable, Ed expected to come away with outstanding. With history of magic, charms, potions, and transfiguration done, the rest of the exams went as smoothly. Flying was popular among the students, far preferable to tedious written tests or precise charm work. And after a successful run through the obstacle course, Ed earned another perfect score from Madame Hooch. Astronomy, herbology, and arithmancy posed no problems for him either. When the last exam was over, the students erupted into cheers. A whole week of holiday lay ahead before results were announced. For Ed, the best news was that Penelope had finished her owls too. With no heavy coursework tying her down, she relaxed and could finally lavish all her attention on Ed, her charming junior. Ed couldn't help but sigh. Women, he thought wryly, really did slow a wizard's wand work. He'd planned to use the free time after exams to finally get started on the monster book, maybe even make some progress in the room of requirement. Instead, he'd been waylaid by Penelope, clingy as a little goblin, whose constant company had drained every spare minute and ounce of energy he had. Ed and Penelope sat on the sun-drenched grass, looking toward the shimmering lake. A gentle breeze ruffled the water, and the two of them talked quietly. When Harry and Ron rounded the bend and saw them, Harry and Ron froze. Penelope laughed at something Ed said, and the sight left both boys unsure whether to interrupt. Hermione, standing just behind them, clenched her fists. Her body trembled with anger. "I knew it, Ed. No wonder you haven't been in the library. So that's what you've been doing, hanging out with this girl." Ed shrugged. "What's so great about books, anyhow? Aren't people better company sometimes?" "Ed, you haven't forgotten you're supposed to be studying magic, have you?" Hermione snapped. When Harry and the others approached, Ed offered Penelope an apologetic smile. Penelope glanced at him, blinked, and, knowing when a prefect should give people space, left without any awkwardness. Ron clicked his tongue. "That's Prefect Penelope, right? Ed, are you dating her? I heard she's a 5th year." "We're just friends," Ed said casually. "We were talking about some homework." Hermione's tone dripped with sarcasm. "I'm sure it was just homework." She turned away quickly, her face flushed and her earlier anger melting into embarrassment. Harry cleared his throat. The group had not come for gossip. They had come for something urgent. Recently, Harry's headaches had eased, and with exams over at last, he and his friends finally had time to think about everything that had happened. Fluffy, the Philosopher's Stone, Nicholas Flamel, Hagrid. They'd pieced together that someone was trying to steal the stone. After running themselves ragged, they'd reached one conclusion. Snape seemed the most likely suspect. Before Harry could tell Dumbledore, he'd found out Dumbledore had left school and gone to the Ministry of Magic. That made Harry and his friends nervous. "This has to be a feint," Ron muttered. "With Dumbledore gone, Snape's not going to miss an opportunity like this." They decided to check whether the Philosopher's Stone was still where it should be. They'd tried earlier that day, but Professor McGonagall had caught them near the dangerous fourth-floor corridor, and since it was after exams, had been unusually lenient. They'd convinced her it had been an accident and been let off with a sharp warning. So now, planning to be more careful, the Gryffindors resolved to go to the hidden room on the fourth floor at night. Dumbledore would be back soon, they reasoned, so if Snape did have plans, they would be acted on within a day or two. Of course, they asked Ed to come along. He appreciated being included in such a noble deed, if only to be useful. He also wanted, silently, to ask what they were thinking. Would a handful of first-years really take on Snape? But the children were stubborn in their conviction that Snape was the thief. Ed decided to let them have their belief, whether it was to avoid interfering with whatever greater plans were unfolding, or simply to keep the future he'd seen intact. He chose not to spoil their determination. He agreed to join. With Ed's consent, their confidence soared. At first, they doubted their ability to face Snape, but with Ed at their side, hope returned. That night, Ed opened a Ravenclaw window and let his two ravens finish their supper, small daily rations he always kept for them, then watched as they flapped their wings and slipped out into the dark. He closed the window, patted the birds on the shoulder. He called them the Red Bishop and the Black Knight, and warned them, "No sleeping tonight. There's something big to do." The ravens gave a low caw, their black eyes bright in the gloom. It was an answer of ready obedience. "We've got this." Ed smiled. His magic had grown stronger over the year at Hogwarts, and the birds had matured with him. He trusted them. When the sky had fully darkened, Ed cast a disillusionment charm over himself and slipped quietly out of the Ravenclaw common room. He made his way to the outside of the fourth-floor corridor and settled into the shadow, waiting. He hadn't been there long when the sound of quick, light footsteps announced the arrival of Harry and the others. Chapter 164. You guys go back. Ed assumed the footsteps belonged to Harry and the others, cloaked beneath the invisibility cloak, until he noticed something off. The pace was for a single person, not a cluster of young wizards. He held his breath and froze in the shadows, the disillusionment charm rendering him almost invisible. The Red Bishop and Black Knight, perched on his shoulders, melted into the darkness beside him, silent as shadows. Soon, a pale, furtive figure crept down the stairs, Professor Quirrell, nervous and white-faced. After glancing around and confirming no one saw him, he slipped into the sealed classroom on the fourth floor. Cerberus barked once, then fell quiet, and a violin began to play itself in the room. The music floated out into the corridor. Ed waited until the melody filled the air before he slipped forward to look inside. Fluffy lay asleep, lulled into a deep, sweet slumber by the music, and the trapdoor to the basement stood open. Ed saw the violin still playing on its own beside the three-headed dog. Footsteps approached again, this time loud and unmistakably multiple, Harry and the others. The Red Bishop on Ed's shoulder gave a soft squawk, and the group froze. "Is that you?" Ed whispered. "Ed, it's us." Ed grunted and dispelled his disillusionment charm. Harry and the others pulled the invisibility cloak off at the same time. "Ed, your disillusionment charm is getting better and better, almost like an invisibility cloak," Ron said, shaking his head. "But still not as good as the cloak. It's better for hiding at night, though." Harry looked past them at Fluffy and the open trapdoor. "Has Snape already been down there?" Ed nodded. He didn't say who had gone down. After keeping this secret all semester, he wasn't about to spoil the reveal for the chosen one now. The others tensed. Their plan had been to stop Snape before he entered, maybe even summon a professor so Snape wouldn't risk it. If someone was already below, it might be too late to get help. Harry stared at the open trapdoor and then said, "You guys go back." He tossed the invisibility cloak to Ron and Hermione. "Take the cloak and go back. I don't need it." Hermione's brow knit. "Harry, what are you talking about?" Ron glared. "We're not leaving you alone. You can't just—" Ed smiled. "Since I came tonight, of course I'm not going to run off alone." Harry looked taken aback. At such a moment, his friends still wanted to stand by him, Hermione, who prized the rules above all, included. Ed patted Harry's shoulder. Harry, I know you care about the Philosopher's Stone more than anyone because of your parents, but you need to learn to stay calm. Many times, you represent more than yourself. If something happens to you, a lot of people will be hurt. He turned to Ron and Hermione. Same goes for you. It's okay to take risks, but make sure you can stay safe. Of course, those words did little to change what the group wanted. When the young Gryffindors got excited, reasoning tended to fly out the window. They pushed open the classroom door the way Quirrell had. He'd already unlocked it. The heavy door creaked, but the music had Fluffy so entranced it paid no mind. The dog twitched its nose as if it smelled them through sleep, but it didn't wake. How long the music would hold the beast was anyone's guess. They moved past Fluffy's enormous head, feeling the hot, fishy breath from its nostrils brush by. The open trapdoor revealed a dark, bottomless shaft. What do we do? Do we jump? Ron asked, voice tight with fear. Even thinking about what might be below was terrifying. After a moment's hesitation, Harry squared his shoulders. Of course we jump. I'll go first. That's dangerous. Ed patted both their shoulders. There's no time to think too much. I'll go down first. Then I'll catch you below. Don't worry. Between the Red Bishop and the Black Knight, I won't fall to my death. Without waiting for their replies, he lifted his robes and stepped off into the dark, gaping hole below. Chapter 165, Brave Game 1.0. The Red Bishop and the Black Knight grabbed his arms and beat their wings gently to slow his descent. Even so, when Ed hit the ground, he realized there'd been no danger in the fall. He landed on something soft. He reached out, felt its texture, and guessed it was Devil's Snare. It made sense. This was a test Dumbledore had set for the little wizards. If the first challenge had truly crippled them, the adventure would have ended before it began. After landing, Ed called up through the small hole in the ceiling, "Safe!" Harry and the others heard him immediately. A few thuds later, the rest of the little wizards dropped down behind him. What is this thing? Ron asked as soon as he hit the ground. The plant's texture felt wrong under his hands. Ed already had his wand out. He cast Lumos, lighting up the cavern and revealing the sinuous, clinging tendrils. Devil's Snare, he said casually. Harry, Ron, don't move yet. Hermione, be careful too. Then he waved his wand again. Hermione, ever the scholar, understood instantly. Devil's Snare loves darkness and damp. Fire is its worst enemy. With a sweep of his wand, Ed cast Incendio, and a ring of flame sprang up around the little wizards. The Devil's Snare's coils recoiled from the heat as if terrified. Taking advantage of the retreat, the group bolted and reached a clear passage before the tendrils could lash back. Ed chuckled. Looks like the staff at the school all put a lot of effort into these traps. He gave Harry and the others a small, pointed look, enough of a reminder without saying too much. He had no wish to interfere with Dumbledore's savior game. Poking at that would probably draw Dumbledore's attention. The fluffy challenge was probably Hagrid's doing, Ed said, nodding back toward where the three-headed dog might have been, and these Devil's Snare plants are likely Professor Sprout's work. There'll be more set by the others. They moved on, thinking about what other lessons the professors might have contrived. Soon they heard a soft rustling and the faint clink of metal ahead. The corridor opened into a wide hall with a high arched ceiling. Hundreds of small, jewel-bright birds circled overhead. At the far end stood a heavy wooden door. It looks like someone's testing our flying class, Ed said with a grin. Leave it to the Gryffindor Seeker, he added, pointing at the row of broomsticks leaning against the wall. Broomsticks, come. At Ed's spell, several brooms rose obediently into his hands. Before anyone could ask what he'd done, he tossed one to Harry. You know what to do. Go get that key. Don't take too long, Ed warned. We need to keep moving. Ron looked up at the swarm of winged keys and groaned. There are so many. How are we supposed to know which key fits that door? Hermione squinted at the door and then at the keys. Look at the color of the door. It's silver, not gold. If the correct key matches the door, then we need to find the silver key among all those gold ones. They mounted their brooms and rose. Hermione's flying was shaky, but every bit of help mattered. Ed, however, thought it would be better if she came down later so she wouldn't slow them. With his enhanced vision, he scanned the skein of keys and picked out a single glinting silver one. He made a small gesture toward Harry. Harry, the practiced seeker, understood immediately. Ron watched the exchange and adjusted his position. The three of them closed in on the silver key from different directions, using coordination honed on countless Quidditch practices. Harry put the broom through a burst of speed and seized the key just as it darted away. "Nice work," Ed said admiringly. "Gryffindor's seeker doesn't disappoint." There was no time to gloat. With Hermione urging them from behind, Harry sped to the door, fitted the silver key in the lock, and turned. The lock clicked, and the heavy door swung open. They entered a room so dark the world vanished behind them. When the door thudded shut and some valve twisted, light rushed in with a swoosh. They found themselves standing on a giant chessboard. Oversized black chess pieces towered to one side. A mirrored army of white pieces stood opposite. "How do we get past this one?" Harry muttered, looking at the enormous figures. Ron slapped his chest. Wizard's chess was one of the few things he felt confident about. "We have to be the pieces," he said. "We'll have to play and win against them to pass." Chapter 166, You Have to Compensate Me for the New Robe. Ron's wizard chess skills were undeniable. After a brutal, evenly matched fight, he finally sacrificed himself to secure the final victory. When the opposing king toppled, the chess pieces cleared a path, and at last, Ron and his friends had passed that trial. Ron was already hurt from the earlier fight. Seeing Ed and the others approaching, he forced himself not to clutch at the wound. Ed muttered a quick reparo over him, enough to slow the bleeding. Ron gritted his teeth and, trying to sound unconcerned, said, "I'm fine. You two keep going." "Are you sure?" Harry asked. Ron's face was a little pale, but he put on a brave front. "Of course. I'm not going to die. Go, stop Professor Snape's plot." The three of them nodded and rushed toward the next room. Hermione's thoughts were racing and becoming clearer by the second. The dark, clinging thing they'd just passed had to be Professor Sprout's devil's snare. The key had been enchanted by Flitwick. The living chess had been McGonagall's transfiguration. That left Quirrell and Snape to be responsible for the next two challenges. "We have to hurry," she said. They only hoped Quirrell's challenge would be strong enough to slow Snape at least a little. Everyone pushed open the next door and were hit by a foul, familiar smell that made them worry. Inside, two giant trolls turned their bean-green eyes toward them, more curious than hostile. Ed felt a spike of annoyance. Weren't these trolls supposed to have been dealt with already by Quirrell? Why were they perfectly fine? Had Dumbledore reawakened them for a test? Without another thought, Ed roared and ignited his evil radiance. The new robe he'd just put on disintegrated into dust. "After this, I am definitely making Dumbledore pay for this robe," Ed muttered. The red bishop and black knight motifs on the torn fabric burst into two black streaks of light and sank into his body. Massive red and black wings unfolded behind him. "You two go on ahead. I'll handle these trolls." Harry opened his mouth, but Hermione grabbed his sleeve. "Trust Ed. Don't get in his way." Ed whistled as the pair ran off. He kicked one troll that lunged after them, sending it sprawling, then faced the two trapped in the room. "All right, Mr. Trolls, version 2.0, coming up." Before the trolls could react, Ed blinked across the short distance and stood in front of one, far faster than it had expected. He had applied a string of auxiliary charms to himself: levitation, shield, and giant strength. It was his preferred combat style now, using precise enchantments to amplify an already powerful physique, then abandoning flashy spells for brutal, close-range force. Against creatures with high magic resistance, it worked brilliantly. Ed's fists smashed into the troll's jaw. An uppercut sent it reeling. He spun and delivered a crushing, whirling kick to its face. Teeth and blood sprayed. The troll howled and collapsed, unable to rise. Compared to his strength at Christmas, back when he'd first been learning, Ed was now 2 to 3 times stronger. These two trolls, even together, weren't the enhanced beast that had attacked on Halloween. The difference showed. The other troll was getting up after he'd kicked it away. Ed dropped to the floor, grabbed a heavy wooden club, took a practice swing, and brought it down on the troll's skull with a thud. It crumpled, helpless. "Game over," Ed said, snapping his fingers to dispel evil radiance. The Red Bishop and Black Knight folded their wings and settled back on his shoulders as dark sigils. Ed glanced at the shredded remains of his robe and muttered, "When I get back, Dumbledore's going to have to reimburse me for a new robe." "That's for sure," a familiar voice said, laced with mild surprise. Ed spun on his heel, wand already leveled, and breathed out with relief when he saw who had spoken. "Professor Dumbledore?" "You're still here," Dumbledore said pleasantly. "So you never left Hogwarts after all." Scrank, "I did have to visit the Ministry for a moment, but I thought it best to draw Quirrell out." Dumbledore waved his wand. The torn scraps of fabric on the floor re-knit themselves and rose, re-draping into a robe around Ed's shoulders. It looked neat, if a little hastily mended. Ed stared at it, helpless. "Even so, Professor Dumbledore, you still owe me a new robe. This patch job doesn't count." His expression said he'd prefer cash compensation. Dumbledore chuckled, eyes twinkling. "This patched-up one is much too small, you say?" Chapter 167, Don't Try to Get Close to Me. "Of course," Dumbledore smiled at Ed. "I'm curious, Mr. Moriarty, when did you first realize something was wrong? When did you discover all of this?" he added. Dumbledore had stopped pretending, so Ed told the truth. He kicked the stinking troll aside, idly used his wand to sweep the dirt from the floor, then sat down and looked up at the old man who was still smiling. "It started a while ago," he said. "Probably when I met that troll on Halloween. Something felt off. That troll was far stronger than any troll I've ever seen, or any described in books," Ed continued, "and most importantly, a creature that powerful shouldn't have let Miss Granger escape with her life. In reality, before we arrived, Hermione managed to get away from that troll. At the time, I didn't notice, but the night I lay in the infirmary, I put the pieces together." "You were there when the troll appeared, Professor?" Ed asked. "Sharp observation," Dumbledore said with a hint of admiration. "No wonder they call you the Raven of Ravenclaw. You deserve the honor. I would even say Mr. Ed Moriarty is the most remarkable student Hogwarts has seen in many years." Ed didn't look pleased by the praise. He went on calmly. "The incident in the Forbidden Forest felt staged, too. The place the unicorn appeared was too convenient. As an experienced gamekeeper, Hagrid would know where an injured unicorn might go," Ed said. "But it wasn't Hagrid who found it. We did, and it happened to be on the road at the edge of the Forbidden Forest where we were patrolling. That struck me as odd. Now that I think about it, Professor Dumbledore, you wanted Harry to feel danger earlier, didn't you? Or perhaps you wanted him to come into contact with Lord Voldemort sooner." Dumbledore clapped his hands softly, watching Ed with genuine appreciation. "So, Mr. Moriarty, you can guess what I was trying to do, can't you?" Ed considered for a moment. "If all of this is part of your plan, and in reality neither Professor Quirrell nor Hogwarts was truly in danger, then the only conclusion I can draw is that you wanted to give Mr. Potter a trial. Because Mr. Potter is the only one who survived Lord Voldemort, the boy who lived." Dumbledore sighed, admiration shining in his eyes as he looked at Ed. Although he had long known Ed was clever beyond the usual pupil, he was still impressed by the depth of Ed's deductions. "Do you know, Mr. Moriarty, your reasoning surprises me more than your easily defeating 2 trolls today. Indeed, my decision to add some difficulty to Mr. Potter's path was a deliberate one. So it was all Dumbledore's doing behind the scenes." Ed's expression betrayed nothing, and Dumbledore neither flinched nor seemed embarrassed at having his secret exposed. Perhaps after a lifetime of maneuvering, old age had taught him to meet revelations with equanimity. He smiled. "So, Mr. Ed Moriarty, would you like to see what happens next? Perhaps after it's over, I will give you, Harry, and the others a proper explanation." Ed nodded. Without further interference from Ed, events returned to their intended course. Hermione helped Harry brew the correct potion, and he walked through the flames to face the greatest enemy of his life, Lord Voldemort. Protected by his mother's sacrificial magic, Harry once again defeated Voldemort and secured the Philosopher's Stone. While Harry lay unconscious afterward, Dumbledore, as one might expect, ensured the story of what had happened spread through Hogwarts. Officially, the news was said to have been leaked by accident. "So, Professor Dumbledore," Ed asked later in the headmaster's office as they shared afternoon tea, "are you doing this merely to make Harry the leader of the students?" "This is only part of it," Dumbledore replied. "In fact, Things are much more complex than they seem. At your stage, Mr. Moriarty, it might be difficult to grasp the whole picture." "Then tell me what I can understand," Ed said with a smile. He accepted a plate of sweets offered by Fawkes and thanked the Phoenix before listening. Dumbledore looked a little surprised. Fawkes had rarely been so familiar with a student. But Ed always seemed to have a way with birds, owls, and ravens. A phoenix was still a bird, after all. The two birds perched on Ed's shoulders, however, were less welcoming. Even Dumbledore could read the hostility in their eyes. "Stay away, don't get close," and he raised an amused eyebrow. Ed only grinned. "Beautiful ladies can be jealous," he said. "It makes my life as their master rather complicated." Dumbledore smiled gently at that. One of the ravens, Miss Red Bishop, gave Ed a small, indignant peck. Only after Ed offered a sincere apology did Miss Red Bishop relent and settle down. Chapter 168, The Greatest Recognition. Dumbledore paused for a moment, then said, "As you saw today, the presence that was expelled from Professor Quirrell's body was Lord Voldemort. He is the most terrifying dark wizard in this world. His mastery of the dark arts may have reached levels no one else can attain. Even in that twisted, degraded form, he is still alive, cannot be killed so easily." He looked at Ed. Ed said nothing. He simply listened, attentive. Dumbledore chose his next words carefully. "In fact, it is precisely for that reason that Harry survived Voldemort all those years ago. Many people think Voldemort died that night, but that isn't entirely true. He has never really died. Living in that distorted state, he will return, and the magic he cast on Harry that night may be the only true way to destroy him." Ed considered this a moment before speaking. "So you mean that night, Voldemort forged some unknown link to Harry with his magic. Voldemort's power in the dark arts makes him otherwise almost impossible to kill. Is that why you have so painstakingly been protecting and guiding Harry, because Harry holds the only way to end the Dark Lord?" "Exactly," Dumbledore said, smiling. "A perfect summary, Mr. Ed." "Do you have anything else to say, Mr. Ed?" Dumbledore asked gently. "Well," Ed hesitated, then met Dumbledore's eyes. "Actually, there is something I'd like to ask. If I may be so bold, Professor Dumbledore, am I also under your tutelage?" Dumbledore smiled, silent for a beat. Ed let out a rueful sigh. "Oh, Professor Dumbledore, I was mistaken. Can I withdraw that question?" Dumbledore shook his head with a kindly smile. "Ed, among all the young wizards I have met, you are the most talented, without exception. Even those exceptionally gifted students I have known fall short compared to you. If you continue to grow, even on your own, I believe you may one day be strong enough to stand against the Dark Lord." He tapped the table lightly. "I don't know all your secrets, but I know this, Ed. You are a good boy. I do not wish to interfere with your growth. I only ask one thing of you. Should an unexpected time come when Harry cannot bear that responsibility, if he cannot, then I hope you will step forward. Do not shy away. Give the rest of those weak, struggling students a chance to survive." Ed was taken aback. He had not expected Dumbledore to speak to him like that. Dumbledore's eyes were the calm blue of a deep bay. They watched him without judgment. After a pause, Ed nodded. "I will, Professor Dumbledore. And if you truly know me," Dumbledore added, "you know I have always been this way." "Of course," Ed said quietly. "You have always been like this, Professor." As the conversation drew to a close and Ed rose to leave the headmaster's office, he paused and turned back. "By the way, Professor, this year's House Cup has to go to Ravenclaw, right? We're over 600 points ahead." Dumbledore smiled faintly. "Yes, there is no doubt about it." "Why do you ask, Mr. Ed?" Dumbledore prompted. Ed shrugged and adopted a mock-serious tone. "Oh, nothing. I just thought Professor Flitwick hasn't won the cup in years. If he doesn't get it this year, he'll be terribly disappointed. He might even cry. Then he'd be too embarrassed to keep teaching us. That would be a shame." With that, he waved and left. The portraits in the walls immediately erupted in laughter, ringing through the office. "Ha! Dumbledore, did you see that? A young wizard has seen through you. He doesn't trust you, Albus. Can you tolerate this? Take 600 points from him and make him cry. Give the lad a break. One Dark Lord is enough. Don't heap scorn on him because you're retired." The wizard hailed as the greatest in the world, outwitted by a child. "Dumbledore, how does that feel?" Dumbledore said nothing. He picked up the half-finished afternoon tea on the table and took a slow sip. After a long moment, he spoke, voice quiet. Isn't this the best outcome? Having such excellent students proves that our teaching at Hogwarts is improving. That, to me, is the greatest recognition I can receive as headmaster. Meanwhile, in the hospital wing, Harry, who had lain unconscious, finally came to. He woke with a scream, a green light still in his mind, and a searing, burning pain through his entire body. He blinked hard and heard Hermione's relieved voice at his bedside. "Harry, you're awake!" Ed, standing nearby, gave a breezy, exaggerated account of the events for Harry's sake. "It's incredible, Harry. You actually defeated the Dark Lord of whom no one speaks. Again!" Harry glanced at Ed's theatrical expression. For the first time in a while, the weight on his chest eased and a small, tired smile touched his lips. Chapter 169. It really wasn't you? If it had been any other student saying the name of the great Dark Lord aloud, it would have been one thing. But this was Ed. Harry had heard him mutter "noseless freak" and even Lord Voldemort more than once without batting an eye. Compared to the adults who whispered the name as if it would bite them, Ed was downright fearless. "So, Harry, you just rest. Everything's been taken care of," Ed said. "Professor Dumbledore will handle whatever comes next. As for your body, your injuries aren't severe, but you were affected by dark arts. If you don't rest properly for a while, there could be lingering effects. Lie still in the infirmary for the next few days." He winked at Harry. "You should be grateful all your finals were finished already. Otherwise, Mr. Harry Potter, once again savior of the world, might have failed everything and been forced to withdraw." Finals. Harry only then remembered. The final exam results were due. Wait, he'd forgotten something else. He turned to the window and froze. The Quidditch finals. He'd missed the match. "What day is it?" he asked urgently. Ed watched Harry's expression and said, "You were unconscious for 3 full days, Harry. The Gryffindor versus Slytherin Quidditch match is over." "You're kidding. Gryffindor in the finals against Slytherin." Harry trailed off. Ed's mouth curved. "Surprise!" He flicked his wand, and the ward door flew open. A triumphant pack of Gryffindor Quidditch players charged in, the Weasley twins prominent among them, brandishing fireworks, party poppers, and streamers. They erupted everything right there in the infirmary. If Ed hadn't intervened, they might have launched Harry into the ceiling. Harry stood dumbfounded as the players cheered and the twins grinned. Ed shot him an amused look. "How's that for a surprise?" "They won," Harry said, barely believing it. Ed beamed. "Gryffindor only lost 1 player. Slytherin lost 4. Even with Snape as the head referee, their makeshift team couldn't hold up." Harry gaped. This was more astonishing than having chased off Voldemort. How could that happen? Is this for real? The players were chased out by an irate Madame Pomfrey wielding a broom, but before she could spot him, Ed had slipped behind a cabinet and put himself under a disillusionment charm. Once the ward was quiet, he cast a silencing charm to keep the noise inside. Only then did he turn back to Harry, who was still reeling. "You didn't see that coming, did you?" Ed asked. "Gryffindor came out on top." Harry narrowed his eyes. "Ed, be honest. Did you send those Slytherins to the hospital?" Ed shrugged in mock innocence. "Me? Sabotage Slytherin? I'm a Ravenclaw, Harry. Why would I do that?" He explained as if to a not entirely convinced friend. He'd put a dung bomb at the Slytherin common room entrance, but it was taken inside and later exploded. He had no idea who actually picked it up. Red Bishop and the others had thrown it by the entrance, but that didn't make it his doing. And the Slytherin players who ended up in the infirmary after a fight with Hufflepuff? That was purely Slytherin arrogance meeting Hufflepuff resistance. He'd had nothing to do with that, either. If anyone deserved credit, he muttered, it was the twins who'd given him the dung bomb in the first place. Harry stared at him, unconvinced. "So you're saying it really had nothing to do with you?" Ed nodded earnestly. Before Harry could push further, a soft knock sounded at the door. "Mr. Potter, Mr. Moriarty, may I come in?" Dumbledore's voice floated through. Ed shrugged and glanced at Madame Pomfrey, who stood outside looking incredulous. She had thought she'd chased all the celebrants away. She hadn't expected one to have slipped through. For Dumbledore's sake, though, she closed the infirmary door and stepped back inside. While the professors at Hogwarts were generally satisfied with Ed, Madame Pomfrey's opinion of him remained extremely low. She treated him almost like the most incorrigible of students. A very fine disillusionment charm, Mr. Ed. However, it's not wise to anger Madame Pomfrey on a whim. Ed shrugged. Madame Pomfrey always tries to shoo every little wizard away, but for patients who've just woken up, having friends around matters too. He smiled. Besides, I checked the school rules carefully. There's no rule forbidding students from using a disillusionment charm to visit classmates in the hospital wing during free time. Dumbledore smiled and nodded. Of course, I think that's a rule we can add soon. But Mr. Moriarty, I must have a word with Mr. Potter now. Ed lost interest in Dumbledore's lecture to Harry. He stretched, and, without any of the other students noticing, slipped off on his own to the room of requirement on the 8th floor. The creation of the monster book had reached its final step. Standing before the nearly finished volume, he tapped it lightly with his raven staff and intoned cleanly. In the name of Ed Moriarty, I call once more. Stars gleam, moonlight spills, space and time entwine, elements converge. With my voice as the key, with my will as the bridge, soul and will intertwine here, binding reality and illusion, transcending past and future. Unveil your veil. Moriarty's monster book, unique to Ed Moriarty, reveal your light. At the last phrase, the book's cover slowly opened. A soft, captivating glow spilled forth, and silver motes raced across the previously blank pages. They shimmered like unicorn hair under moonlight, weaving themselves into a line of text. Moriarty's monster book. Ed closed his fingers around the book. Immediately, a thread of connection ran from the tips of his fingers to his heart. It was the same blood-bonded feeling he'd felt with the Raven Spirit contract. The mark of thorns on his chest that linked him to Red Bishop and Black Knight now reached out and joined with the monster book. After so much painstaking work and the final rite of awakening, the book had finally accepted him as its master. He let out a long, relieved breath and slipped the newborn monster book into his backpack. It was still fragile and could not yet display all its powers. It would need a steady supply of magic from its master to grow. That would take time and restraint, something Ed understood. He'd already been in the room of requirement long enough. Secrecy mattered. Having completed the creature's creation, he hummed as he walked down the 8th floor corridor toward the Great Hall. Midway there, he received more good news from the other little wizards. The end-of-term exam results had been posted, and everyone was receiving their report cards. The announcement brought as much anxiety as relief, and Ed changed his mind about eating in the Great Hall. He turned back to the dormitory instead. Sure enough, a Hogwarts report card lay waiting on his bedside table. He slit open the envelope and unfolded the sheet. His smile widened at once. Every subject was marked O. Even Snape, who had always been the toughest on him and perhaps the least fond of him, had grudgingly given an outstanding. An O was the highest grade at Hogwarts. 8 O's meant a perfect term across the board. Ed thought of how proud Grandma Cynthia would be when he told her he'd worked hard and achieved excellence in every subject. He felt double joy. Too lazy to walk back to the Great Hall, he rummaged in a drawer for the snacks Red Bishop and Black Knight favored and munched on them instead. They tasted better than anything he'd had in the dining hall. The two creatures didn't mind their master's rude habit of stealing their treats, as long as he didn't start feeding other birds with them, although Ed had been known to do that more than once. Then, the last little surprise arrived. The final public lounge instance boss for Hufflepuff had been defeated. In the miniature chibi-style game, his tiny avatar had raised the raven staff and hammered the boss's head. A golden chest crashed down from the sky to mark the end of the run. Ed stepped forward, eager, and opened it. A burst of golden light spilled out, his reward from the last treasure chest, the Compendium of Ritual Magic. Chapter 171, Raven's Proof. Ed was a little surprised. Ritual magic. He knew the modern wizarding world had long since favored charms for convenience. The old, elaborate rites had been shelved in history's dust. Ritual magic required special conditions and complex steps, things people rarely practiced anymore. Besides, the ritual magic the system handed out might not even match the ritual magic of this world. Like the monster book before it, it could be only loosely related, essentially something new. Ed hadn't expected the system's final reward to be this. He thought back over the rewards the system had given so far: the crafting method for the monster book, the crafting manual for the destiny card, the refining technique for the soul crystal, and now ritual magic. There had to be a connection between the four. Had the monster book itself been part of a ritual? He remembered the incantation he'd used when he successfully crafted and awakened the monster book. Maybe the crafting and awakening had been a ritual, almost like signing a contract. With that in mind, he continued to control his character in the game, quickly sweeping up the remaining scattered monsters. The last piece of the Raven's proof turned up in Hufflepuff's last dormitory. When all 10 pieces were combined, their final attribute read, Raven's Proof. Perform an enhancement for your Raven's spirit. Afterward, they will be able to break racial limits and freely control their body size. The Raven's Proof could be used in-game. Ed clicked to confirm. The Red Bishop and the Black Knight, perched on his shoulders, cawed twice in confusion, and then began to grow. Alarmed caws turned frantic as the two ravens swelled into giants, each about 3 feet long with wingspans over 7 feet. Even with their wings folded, they were nearly as tall as a 6 or 7-year-old child, almost reaching Ed's waist. "So big!" Ed exclaimed, reaching out to stroke them. The Red Bishop and the Black Knight seemed to understand the change and let out 2 disgruntled caws. Clearly, at that size, they couldn't stay on his shoulders. Even before, having them there all day had been a burden. Ed reached out and soothed his 2 companions. "I remember. You can control your size now." The Raven's Proof had explained it in detail. Ed felt a flush of joy as he looked at them. If this kept up, in a couple of years he might actually stand on their backs. The pet riding master image would be reversed. The thought made him unusually excited. The Red Bishop and the Black Knight tilted their heads, thinking. Then, realizing they did possess the ability, they slowly shrank back to their previous size and hopped up onto Ed's shoulders again. After all, they still preferred that spot. With that, the dungeon in the game was finally cleared. The screen whooshed, and a burst of virtual fireworks exploded. Instead of the usual "Game Over" or "Hero, please try again," the word "cleared" filled the display. Ed exhaled a long sigh of relief. It was over. Today had been fortunate. The 3 thorny problems that had been plaguing him were all resolved in a single day. Harry had driven Lord Voldemort away, the school was safe for the time being, and Ravenclaw would take the House Cup. Dumbledore had officially acknowledged it, so there was little chance of any further tricks. All the troublesome dungeons were cleared, the rewards claimed, and his monster book was officially complete. The flood of knowledge about ritual magic in his head made his temples throb. Exhausted, he collapsed onto his bed and fell into a deep sleep. It was his first year in the wizarding world, and he felt it had ended perfectly. He slept late, later than he had in a long time, and woke feeling unusually refreshed. After a lazy stretch and a greeting to the Red Bishop and the Black Knight, he climbed out of bed and made his way to the Great Hall. Blue and bronze streamers hung everywhere, Ravenclaw's colors. Ed smiled with a deep, contented satisfaction. His desperate efforts to earn points for Ravenclaw had not been in vain. The blue banners that now decorated the hall celebrated the young eagle's victory in the House Cup. Behind the professor's dais, where the 4 great house banners usually hung, there were no longer 4, only a single, massive banner bearing the eagle of Ravenclaw. Chapter 172. Be proud of when Ed Moriarty stepped into the Great Hall. He could feel the Slytherin's hostility like a physical thing. It wasn't just aimed at him. Nearly every Ravenclaw was receiving the same cold stares. Ravenclaw had snatched the House Cup from Slytherin after 7 years of Slytherin dominance. Ed ignored the haughty looks, walked past the Slytherin table, and made his way to the Ravenclaw table. At the head, Penelope smiled and pointed to a seat reserved for him right at the front. "This is where you belong, Mr. Moriarty," she said. "You are Ravenclaw's pride." He deserved it. In a single term, Ed had scored more than 700 points for Ravenclaw, more than any individual in the house's history. Because of him, Ravenclaw had surged past both Gryffindor and Slytherin, securing the House Cup with a lead of over 600 points. No one could argue he hadn't earned that seat. The moment he sat down, the Ravenclaw tables erupted. Students cheered and chanted. Ed Moriarty, we won the House Cup. Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw. Ed smiled and glanced over at the Gryffindor table, which was lively too. Though they hadn't won the House Cup, Gryffindor had edged out Slytherin in the final house standings and had taken the Quidditch Cup by beating Slytherin on the pitch. Professor McGonagall, unusually relaxed, wore a rare, almost uncontrollable smile. Professor Flitwick, sitting at the staff table, squinted and beamed as he watched the Ravenclaws celebrate. After clearing his throat a few times, Dumbledore quieted the hall and delivered the longest speech Ed had heard since arriving at Hogwarts. He reviewed the year's teaching and progress, praised staff and students, and finally announced the house's final scores. As the numbers settled, cheers and stamping filled the great hall. Ravenclaw's victory was met with enthusiastic applause from Hufflepuff and Gryffindor as well. Only the Slytherins remained stony-faced. They stood and clapped out of decorum, their applause short and reluctant, but it was enough. The looks on their faces were reward enough for the Ravenclaws. "Well done," Dumbledore said, smiling. "Of course, before we finalize the totals, there are a few last matters to consider." Ed's heart dropped. He had a bad feeling and wanted to bang his fist on the table and shout, "Dumbledore, you promised me." But he stayed silent as Dumbledore continued, seemingly unaware of the sudden tension in the room. "In the final moments," Dumbledore went on, "some students displayed remarkable bravery and brought a surprise to Hogwarts." He unfolded a strip of cloth he had been holding, cleared his throat, and announced, "First, Mr. Ron Weasley." All heads turned to Ron. The attention flushed his face crimson. Dumbledore smiled and spoke warmly. "Mr. Ron Weasley showed extraordinary courage in the most brilliant game of wizard's chess Hogwarts has seen. His choice exemplified Gryffindor bravery and self-sacrifice. For that, I award Gryffindor 100 points." Gryffindor erupted. The extra points wouldn't change Ravenclaw's commanding lead, but the public recognition from the headmaster thrilled the Gryffindors. It wasn't just about points. It was about honor. Ed noticed several Gryffindors turning towards the Slytherin table with triumphant looks. The Slytherins were already suffering the sting of the worst House Cup defeat they'd had in years, and it seemed this humiliation might be revisited to them again in the years to come. Chapter 173. The College Cup finally didn't run away. The cheers from Gryffindor shook the ceiling, and Ed could even make out Percy's excited voice from their table. "That's my brother, Ron Weasley. That's my youngest brother. He made it across the giant chessboard Professor McGonagall set up." The Gryffindor cheering grew louder. The Weasley brothers were unabashedly proud. The look on their faces made it seem as if they had won the honor themselves. The twins liked to tease Ron, but when it counted, they were fiercely protective of their youngest brother. Boys weren't fussed over like the younger girls back home, so Ron getting into trouble now and then was almost expected. Ed clapped just as enthusiastically. Even if Dumbledore gave Ron and two others 100 points each, Ravenclaw could survive it. If Dumbledore had decided to throw 600 or 700 points to Gryffindor to overtake Ravenclaw, Ed was fairly certain Professor Flitwick would have been beside himself. When the clamor finally died down, Dumbledore calmly announced Hermione's points. She earned 100 for her clear-headed decisions and potion brewing in the crisis. Snape snorted audible disapproval. Ed suspected that if Dumbledore hadn't put his wand to Snape's neck, Snape would never have allowed potions that first-years could brew on those challenge stations. Next, Dumbledore awarded another 100 points to brave Harry Potter for his defeat of you-know-who. To Ed's surprise, Ravenclaw picked up more than 100 points in between. The students were calling him the Troll Slayer for his part in dealing with the troll. All in all, Dumbledore didn't seem to be playing favorites. Gryffindor still had more points from sheer numbers, but not enough to threaten Ravenclaw's lead. Relieved, Ed stood, raised his hands, and accepted the students' cheers. After the final totals were read, Dumbledore signaled that it was time for the last feast of the year. Platters of food appeared on the long tables, and the students threw themselves into the festivities. In those last few days, everyone was restless. Even Gryffindor's most notorious troublemakers were uncharacteristically well-behaved, already thinking about going home. After so long away, most of the students were a little homesick. Hogwarts was wonderful, but home had its own pull. Only Harry's smile faded. He didn't want to go back to the Dursleys. He'd even asked Professor McGonagall to stay at school for the summer, and had been rudely refused. He accepted the verdict with gloomy resignation. Ed himself felt a little restless before leaving. He was running low on soul crystals. He needed them for his own absorption, to feed Red Bishop and Black Knight, to tend the ravens at Hogwarts, and especially to produce the destiny cards that went with the monster book. He'd been clearing the Scarlet Monastery and the Wraith Dormitory dungeons at a 1:4 ratio and planned to tackle higher-level dungeons once the monster book's abilities had developed further. Right now, his strength was just enough for low-level runs. Diving straight into the difficult stuff would be reckless. Before heading off, Ed went to see Hagrid, not alone this time. Penelope had come along, curious and wide-eyed, trailing him toward the edge of the Forbidden Forest. "Hello, Ed," Hagrid said, surprised to see him arrive again without Harry and the others. He looked at Penelope and grinned. "Is this your new girlfriend, Ed?" Ed shook his head quickly. "No, she's just a charms practice partner." Hagrid gave her a passing look, and then asked in his booming voice, "So what brings ye here?" Ed didn't hide anything. "How's Freya? Is she getting better?" He meant the unicorn Voldemort had wounded. Creatures scarred by dark magic took a long time to heal. Hagrid nodded. "She's near enough right as rain now." He blew a long, sharp whistle. From the trees behind his hut, a soft tap, tap, tap sounded as a unicorn with gleaming fur stepped carefully out of the forest. It watched Ed and Penelope warily, as if it wanted to come closer, but wasn't sure. "She's beautiful. Is that a unicorn?" Penelope whispered. It was her first time seeing one up close. Her eyes lit up. "Can I touch it, Hagrid?" Chapter 174, Making Cards. Hagrid hesitated for a moment, then looked to Freya for her opinion. The unicorn paused as well, hesitating briefly because of Ed before stepping toward Penelope and lowering her head slightly. Penelope cried out in surprise. She had come looking for Ed that morning, only to find out he'd gone into the Forbidden Forest to talk to Hagrid. Curious why he would seek out the gamekeeper, she had shamelessly followed, never expecting such a pleasant surprise. Ed smiled at the unicorn, who was almost fully recovered. He took a step forward to greet her, then flinched when Freya shot him a wary glance. Even though their relationship had improved, unicorns still hated being close to male wizards, Ed included. Seeing the wary look on Freya's face, Ed's smile froze. He could already imagine Penelope's triumphant expression. He shook his head and met the unicorn's bright, cautious eyes. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'm not trying to get close this time. I just need one of your tail hairs. One that's just fallen will do." He clasped his hands together and blinked at Freya. "Please, Freya, my good girl, just one." Freya studied him carefully, making sure he truly meant it and wasn't angling for a sneak touch. Compared to her silvery white coat, the long tail, shimmering with a mercury-like sheen, was the unicorn's most treasured feature. A single hair was worth dozens of galleons, and a beauty like Freya would command an even higher price. Ed kept his wand in hand, and with Freya's consent, plucked the longest tail hair without resistance. He carefully folded it into a small box, then hurriedly said his goodbyes to Hagrid. There was no time to dawdle. In the rituals for making destiny cards, the most vital materials, freshly obtained from magical creatures, had to be used quickly, or their potency would seep away. After a brief greeting to Penelope, Ed bolted back toward the castle so fast her vision blurred. She could only stamp her foot in frustration, annoyed at how easily her junior had slipped away. Ed dashed through the castle, but kept his footsteps controlled. Most students were enjoying the sunshine outside during this break between terms. There were few people inside. He ran to the 8th floor without meeting anyone and stopped in front of the room of requirement. He paced 3 times and spoke the request aloud. "I need a room where I can create destiny cards. I need a room where I can create destiny cards. I need a room where I can create destiny cards." The door opened to a familiar space. He'd made similar requests before, a workshop for crafting monster books, for instance, so the room looked much the same, adapted for card making. Ed didn't think about it further. He stepped inside and pulled a glowing blank card from his backpack. Both faces of the card were empty, but its silvery white material shimmered faintly. This was no ordinary card. It was made from ingredients gathered from more than a dozen rare magical creatures, refined by unique alchemical methods, and had taken Ed 5 full days to prepare. Compared to the months required to create the monster book, this card had been relatively simple, though he'd botched the process 2 or 3 times, wasting a great deal of expensive material. He'd spent over 3,000 galleons on this single blank. Ed then retrieved the unicorn tail hair from its box. He tapped the hair with his wand, then touched the card, and began the ritual from the tome. He activated the magic within himself and intoned the necessary incantation. The silver hair seemed to come alive, dissolving into a swirling silver mist that solidified into a miniature unicorn. It was far smaller than Freya, no taller than Ed's knee, its eyes full of innocence and curiosity as it studied him for a moment. At Ed's command, the little unicorn leapt into the card. Immediately, Ed felt the bond, his soul and his magic knitting with the card. A familiar, draining sensation washed over him, the same fatigue he'd felt when raising the Red Bishop and the Black Knight. He swallowed a restorative potion and felt some of his strength return, but the drain persisted until the ritual completed. When it was done, he breathed a long sigh of relief. The silvery card glowed faintly. On its surface, the silhouette of a unicorn had appeared, standing in a green forest and drinking from a pool. "It's finally made," he murmured. He knew, however, that this was only the first step. Chapter 175, The Contract of the Monster Book. He stretched out his hand. As if sensing him, his backpack shivered and a book leapt out of it, pages rustling. It was Moriarty's monster book. The book came alive, flipping through its pages on its own, before pausing at a blank spot in the middle. Satisfied, it stopped its antics, fluttered like a bird, and hovered in front of Ed. Ed set the destiny card he was holding onto the open page, tapped his staff, and began to recite the ritual magic charms. As he chanted, a steady stream of blood poured from his arm, and the thorny patterns across his chest began to flare and flicker. Having read the ritual through beforehand, Ed understood what was happening. His body was reacting the way it always did when a crow spirit contract was already bound to him, and he tried to sign another. It was an instinctive defense, but not an uncontrollable one. The 2 contracts wouldn't clash. The Red Bishop and the Black Knight perched on his shoulders stiffened for a moment, then relaxed. Ed himself didn't relax at all. This was old, obscure magic. Even if the theory suggested it wasn't lethal, attempting any unfamiliar ritual was risky. He trusted the system's capabilities, though, and pressed on. He guided the blood with his staff and let drops fall onto the monster book. The instant the blood touched the page, inked characters began to form as if the book were writing itself. A string of ancient, mysterious symbols spread across the back of the page where the unicorn had been imprinted. As the bleeding continued, the script completed itself, elegant lines filling the page like a pattern. When the incantation reached its final syllable, the last drop of blood landed on the page. Ed cleared his throat and intoned, "In the name of Ed Moriarty, upon this Moriarty's monster book, I hereby sign this contract with this newly born spirit." A name appeared at the top of the card page, the words, "Holy Light Unicorn." The monster book snapped shut with a thud and fell to the floor, its pages losing their shimmer. Ed let out a long breath, feeling his magic drained and his body weak. He made a mental note to drag himself over to the Hufflepuff kitchens and beg the house elves for some raw meat. With summer break almost here, the kitchens might still have supplies. He stared at the closed book, pleased. With that new entry, the monster book had unlocked part of its function. It could now supply an additional unit in his game system. The book itself could replace either the Red Bishop or the Black Knight as one of his 3 deployable units. The catch was obvious. The Holy Light Unicorn was newly formed and utterly unfed by magic, so its strength was very low. He tested it in a simulator. The summoned unicorn could aid in combat, but it was far weaker than both the Red Bishop and the Black Knight. Worse, his crow spirit bond to those 2 increased his damage significantly. Replacing them would be a net loss. He kept his dungeon-clearing lineup unchanged. Still, the monster book's potential was undeniable. It was a creation that grew as it was developed. No wonder it was hailed as one of the greatest alchemical inventions. Even with a single recorded creature, Ed could feel the latent power within. If he cataloged enough beasts and charms into it, the book alone could act as an entire team. A casual flip of its pages could unleash forbidden, world-shaking spells and call forth ancient, terrifying creatures to the battlefield. Displays that made even Avada Kedavra and Lord Voldemort seem small by comparison. Thinking of dangerous creatures made Ed remember the basilisk slumbering in the underground pipes. He needed a basilisk fang. A unicorn's tail, hair, and horn were its most spiritual parts, and he wasn't about to try ripping Freya's horn off. Even getting one of Freya's feathers had been a stroke of luck. The basilisk, however, required no such delicacy. Its eyes and its venomous fangs held the essence of its magic. The eyes were the deadliest. Danger remained even if they were removed, so they were far too risky to handle. The fangs, though venomous, were safer with careful handling. After all, lethal charms were not something to be trifled with. Chapter 176, Leave School. As the day to leave Hogwarts approached, the young wizards suddenly found their trunks empty and their belongings packed into suitcases. At the same time, the library sent out a flood of notices demanding the return of borrowed books. Many students who had taken books home for months without opening them suddenly remembered they'd borrowed anything at all. Under Madame Pince's displeased glare, they hauled the stacks back to the library. Edward, of course, rushed over with towering piles and had to make 3 or 4 trips before everything was returned. Honestly, without the professors signing those borrowing slips, he never would have managed to check so many books out. Then came the out-of-school prohibitions, no magic outside of Hogwarts, and similar restrictions. Harry's face went dark. He could already imagine how bleak his summer would be. Although Edward had warned him beforehand, having it formalized still made Harry unhappy. The ban on using magic away from school hit Muggleborns far harder than purebloods. The Ministry's surveillance wasn't usually that strict for children from wizarding families. If magic flared near their home, the Ministry tended to be lenient, assuming parents were responsible. But for Muggleborn families, any unexplained magical residue could be misinterpreted as underage magic, and the child would be blamed. Edward felt the Ministry's bias clearly. The rules helped widen the gap between pure-blood families who could continue practicing at home and Muggleborns who had to hide everything and couldn't practice openly. Given Hogwarts' lax, leisurely atmosphere, after 2 months of summer play, most students would forget much of what they'd learned. These were bigger problems than Harry or Edward could fix. Still, for Edward, the practical impact wasn't severe. He planned to spend the summer studying the monster book and the ritual magic he'd found in the treasure chest. He hadn't yet mastered those subjects. It would be a huge advantage if he could understand them fully before graduation. Harry had been gloomy at first, but then he brightened. His aunt and uncle wouldn't know about the prohibition unless he told them. If he stayed quiet, 2 months under the Dursleys wouldn't be the end of the world. He could even scare Dudley a little. There was some pleasure in that thought. The dark clouds in his mood lifted. He felt less reluctant about returning to Privet Drive. Edward patted him on the shoulder. "Don't be down. When I sort my things this summer, I'll come visit you. I don't know. Would you want me to?" Harry blinked. Edward had mentioned visiting before. Harry had assumed it was casual talk. He smiled and nodded. "Of course I'd want you to." Edward smiled back. He felt a subtle fluctuation in his inner senses. After studying rituals, he'd become more attuned to such things and realized he had unintentionally triggered a minor ritual effect. There was no danger. His spirit hadn't sounded an alarm, but the pattern made sense. Protective magic around Harry should have masked his location completely. Normally, even with Harry's address, Edward shouldn't have been able to find where he was staying. Harry's invitation had changed that. In effect, Harry had voluntarily revealed his location. Edward knew he could have simply waited near Privet Drive and let Harry find him, which might have bypassed part of the protection, but Harry's consent made approaching directly the better option. "Don't forget me, mate," Ron called out. "I asked Mum," Ron added later, his face lighting up. "She said she'd be very happy to have you and Harry visit our house." Hermione, of course, was a different matter. Her parents would never let her spend a month or 2 away at another wizard's home. But Edward had more freedom at the orphanage, and after a year at Hogwarts, he'd grown taller and more independent. He wondered if the woman who ran the place would even recognize him. He smiled at the thought. The friends boarded the Hogwarts Express with lighter hearts. As the countryside slipped past and the castle and lake faded behind them, a gentle silence fell over the compartment. "All right, Harry, you'll be back in 2 months. Don't get too down." Ron patted Harry's shoulder and reached for candy, but instead his hand closed around something that twitched. He calmly shoved it back into his pocket and pretended nothing had happened. Nobody in the compartment focused on the small movement. Only Red Bishop and Black Knight glanced briefly at Ron's pocket before turning their heads. They didn't understand why their master had told them not to chase that rat. To them, it was different from any other rodent. The two of them were very obedient to Edward, and so they obeyed without question. Chapter 177. Why haven't you replied yet? I'm dying. The train rumbled past one Muggle town after another. As the destination neared, Ed and Harry took off their wizard robes and changed into Muggle clothes. Ed immediately noticed his outfit felt a bit small. He could just barely squeeze into the coat. The students filed out through platform 9 and Ed waved as they departed. He gave his shoulders a little shake. Red Bishop and Black Knight spread their wings and took to the air, heading back toward the familiar street. The two little ravens seemed to remember happier times and circled joyfully above. Compared to Harry, who often had someone waiting to meet him, Ed didn't have many people to pick him up. His grandmother was too old to come to the station, and the others were no different. After the ravens had played long enough, he summoned them down. They landed nimbly on his shoulders. All right, stop fooling around. We're going home. Harry's life at Privet Drive hadn't been easy. This summer should have been wonderful. It should have been a proper holiday. Instead, everything had gone wrong after that inexplicable house elf appeared. Not only had he received a warning from the Ministry of Magic, but he'd also found out he couldn't use magic outside school. He'd been sent back to the cupboard under the stairs, his familiar miserable corner. His wand, broom, and books had been taken away, and even Hedwig was locked in her cage. Letters from friends were burned before he could read them. The Dursleys' expressions, a mixture of suspicion and disgust, never left him wondering how long such days would last. And Ed and Ron, those two who'd said they'd come for him during the holidays, had so far stayed away. Earlier, Harry had seen a note from Ed saying he was at Ron's house and would come get him soon. But after days of waiting, there had been no reply. He knew that if Ed had sent a message, it would have been delivered by Red Bishop and Black Knight. The ravens were clever enough to get the letter into his hands, unlike the owls whose deliveries Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon intercepted. That night, Harry stared up at the dark sky, hoping to see large ravens swoop down with a message. He had a strange habit. Whenever birds called outside his window, he would stick his head out in hope. Even now, though his food was scarce, he would still break off crumbs to leave on the sill for any raven that landed. He half scolded himself for it. He couldn't even feed himself properly, and yet he fed birds, a habit he blamed on Ed's influence. Tonight felt different. 2 large ravens descended, flapping their wings and striking the still, blank-faced boy on the head. Harry was stunned for a second, then delighted. "Red Bishop, Black Knight!" he cried, covering his mouth when he realized how loudly he'd spoken. He glanced around nervously. His aunt and uncle slept on, undisturbed. He looked the ravens over, expecting a letter, but there was none. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he recovered quickly. "Wait, if Ed didn't write to me, why did he send you 2? Is he here?" The ravens, having watched his momentary daze, gave him a look that said, as plainly as a bird could, that this child could still be rallied. They extended one sharp claw each and patted Harry's shoulder, exactly the way Ed used to pat him. Harry had to smile. Birds and master, he thought, often acted the same. He's really coming? Where is he? Harry peered out, expecting perhaps to see Ed flying on a broom. No, Ed knew Muggle transport well enough not to do anything so dramatic. If he was coming, it would be by an ordinary car or bicycle. Harry searched the empty street below. Under the dim sodium lamps, there were no cars, no movement. Still, he thought he heard an engine, a a far-off rumble that didn't match the quiet. Red Bishop, impatient, gave Harry another nudge and then pointed her wing up into the night. Harry followed her gesture. Far above, a very old Ford hurtled toward them through the sky. Its headlights were off, but its engine roared through the darkness. The car flew straight for Harry's window and slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop so close he could have reached out and touched it. It rocked, nearly crashing into the house. Harry's mouth dropped open. He had not expected Ed to pick him up in quite this manner. Ed, in the driver's seat, winked at Harry. "What are you staring at? Move. I'm getting out." Harry snapped to attention, stepped back, and rolled down the window. Ed pushed the car door open and climbed out. The car hovered in the air, engine silent. In the passenger seat, Ron waved and laughed at Harry while complaining. "What's going on, Harry? Why haven't you written back? I've sent you more than 20 letters, and you haven't answered a single one. Dad said you got a warning from the ministry for misusing magic. What happened?" "Didn't we agree not to use magic?" Harry began. He was about to explain it wasn't his doing, about the house elf, but Ed cut him off with a wave. "You can catch up with Ron later." He darted into the Dursleys' house, looked Harry over, and snorted. "Looks like your summer hasn't been much fun, has it?" Ron kept up his scolding from the doorway. "Don't you know we can't use magic in front of muggles? If you keep using magic, the ministry could expel you. This isn't a joke." "It wasn't me." "No, how did you know? And do you lot really get to tell other people not to use magic outside school? What's with this car?" Harry asked. "Ron's dad works at the ministry," Ed answered simply. "We borrowed this car from Mr. Weasley and came to pick you up." "Borrowed?" "Well, we kind of nicked it, technically, but that's beside the point." He glanced at Harry's stunned face and patted his shoulder. "Don't worry, this is an enchanted car, and we didn't cast any spells to get it here. The ministry won't come looking for trouble, so where are your things?" Harry had been dreading this moment and felt a sudden rush of relief. He could go. Even if Ron was a bit hot-headed, he trusted Ed completely. If Ed said there wouldn't be any trouble, then there probably wouldn't be. Or Ed would know how to handle it. He shoved aside the last of his hesitations. "They put everything in the cupboard, but it's locked. I can't get them out. Take me there." Harry led Ed to the locked cupboard. Ed didn't fumble for an Alohomora or wave a wand. He grabbed the cabinet and gave a strong yank. Several small locks tore free with a metallic clatter. Harry stared. He hadn't expected Ed to open the cupboard that way. Ed dropped the locks on the floor. With his current strength, even a hefty padlock would have come free. These little locks had been nothing. Inside, the Dursleys had indeed packed Harry's things neatly. Textbooks, wand, a flying broomstick. Everything important was there. "And Hedwig?" Harry asked. "No problem." Ed snapped his fingers. "Black Knight and the others have things under control." At that moment, a figure came skidding out from another room, a darker companion carrying Hedwig's cage in its mouth. Hedwig sat silent and still in the cage, evidently accustomed to Red Bishop and Black Knight. Harry watched them, speechless. "Are we going now?" he asked. "Of course. What else are you waiting for?" Ed said. He pulled a letter from his pocket and tossed it onto the Dursleys' windowsill. Harry blinked at the motion. Ed raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think your aunt and uncle would take it well if we just spirited you away and left without a word, did you? We have to tell them what happened." Harry felt a surge of admiration. Ed was as decisive and self-contained as ever, exactly the sort of person he could rely on. Ed continued, casual as ever. "I told them their precious nephew's been taken by us for the rest of the summer, so they don't need to worry anymore. I also slipped them a little compensation for the damaged locks in the garden. That should convince them we're really your classmates and not kidnappers they'll call the Muggle police about." Harry couldn't help smiling. "You've thought of everything. What else can I say?" Chapter 179, Finally Alive. Harry sat sullenly in the back seat of the car, holding Hedwig's cage. After a moment, he opened it and let Hedwig fly free. She joined the two other owls circling in the night sky. Inevitably, the commotion woke the Dursleys. They came grumbling out of their rooms. "Better not meet them," Mrs. Dursley muttered. "Let's make sure we leave a good impression." Mr. Dursley only grunted. Ed slammed the accelerator, and the old car coughed and wheezed as if some feeble pensioner had been made to haul a cart. It jolted up into the night. Mr. Dursley ran to the window and watched it disappear, and then spotted the letter on the windowsill. He stood there with his mouth open, bewildered, until he had read it. Slowly, his earlier panic eased. He pulled a few 10-pound notes from the envelope and muttered, "Not all of that boy's friends are rude. It's good he left early. I don't want to see him again." Ed's apology hadn't been much, but it was enough to soften their faces slightly. Mrs. Dursley snatched the letter from her husband as soon as he set it down. Only after she'd read everything did she exhale. "He must have planned this for a long time," she said, then immediately began to rant. "That ungrateful little wretch, always trying to run away. It's for the best he left. He never belonged here. Monsters should be with monsters." Mr. Dursley grumbled as they shut the window. The lights went out, and even their complaints faded to whispers, as if they were afraid the neighbors might hear. For the moment, the house fell quiet. Up in the air, Harry was grinning so wide he could have split his face. "That's brilliant, you lot. How did you think of rescuing me like this? It's amazing." He squinted into the dark and then asked, puzzled, "Don't we need headlights?" Ed waved a hand without taking his eyes off the road. "Muggles will see us." Harry frowned. "Even at night, we've got to be careful." Ed shrugged. "Doesn't matter. I can see fine in the dark." Harry blinked, realizing why it was Ron's car, but Ed behind the wheel. The old vehicle was temperamental. Every so often, Ed had to give it a good thump before the engine would cough and carry on. But Harry wasn't worried about the car falling out of the sky anymore. Being away from the Dursleys felt like waking from a nightmare. "I never got your replies, Ed," he said. "I thought you'd forgotten me." "How could I?" Ed grinned. "I was planning to pick you up later. When I heard you weren't getting any replies, I guessed your aunt and uncle had shut you in. And I was right. I told Ron, and we decided to come for you." The car climbed higher into the night, where there was little chance of being spotted by Muggles. Behind them, Red Bishop, Black Knight, and Hedwig flew side by side, the three owls keeping company as if they were chatting. Harry glanced after them and relaxed. Owls are magical creatures. Even if one got lost, they'd find their owner again. He let out a long breath and flopped back into the surprisingly roomy back seat. The inside of the battered car seemed far larger than its exterior. He still didn't fully understand the undetectable extension charm, but it looked very clever. "You finally came for me," Harry said, voice thick with relief. "If you'd come any later, I don't know what would have happened. You don't know how awful it's been." "It's not that dramatic," Ed said casually as he steered. "If you endure enough hardship, you get used to more hardships." Harry and Ron both fell silent at that for a moment. Then Harry brightened. "I'm saved by you lot. How was your holiday?" Harry was mainly talking to Ed. Ed had sent only 2 letters while Harry was trapped. One saying he'd come for him later, and another saying he'd changed plans and would stop at Ron's first. "Not much," Ed said. Harry noticed that in less than a month, Ed had grown a lot. He now stood nearly a head taller than both Harry and Ron. They could barely reach his shoulder. Harry and Ron exchanged a look, and, remembering the thing Ed had fed Norbert last year, they suspected Ed had been taking some kind of growth potion. It looked expensive, so neither dared ask for any. "I mostly went back to the orphanage to earn a bit of money and helped with chores," Ed continued. "After that, I was going to take Mia out for a treat. Then Ron wrote and invited me over, so I came." The car hummed along through the night, the 3 friends at last together, and heading somewhere that felt a little more like safety. Chapter 180. Isn't it interesting? Bullshit. Why can you talk about something so exciting so casually? And honestly, how do you make money? Harry thought, then heard Ed continue in that same offhand tone. "As for why I didn't reply sooner or come to pick you up earlier," Ed said casually. "Of course it's because I can practice magic at Ron's house." "You can use magic at Ron's house?" Harry's mouth fell open in disbelief. "What do you mean?" Ed glanced at him. "It's normal for kids born into wizarding families to have that advantage, isn't it?" "But won't the Ministry of Magic detect it if you use magic outside of school?" "In theory, yes," Ed said as he drove, and then took the opportunity to explain some basic facts to Harry, the underage wizard. "Our wands are registered with the Ministry, so if we cast spells with them outside of school, the ministry can tell. But there's a second method. They also detect magical disturbances in a given area. You can't rely on wand registration alone. Think about it. If your parents used your wand at home, would it make sense for the ministry to send you a warning? So in wizarding families, even if a child uses their wand, the ministry won't assume the child cast it. They can't be sure whether it was the kid or an adult. Makes sense, right? Damn it, Harry snapped. He was furious. This was ridiculous. What was the point of hiding it like that? Besides, he hadn't even used a wand. He hadn't done magic at all. He had never felt the ministry's bias so clearly before. A completely different set of rules for children from wizarding families versus those from muggle families. Young wizards born to magic families could get away with private charm practice. Those born to muggles couldn't. And Harry hadn't even used a wand. "Don't worry, Harry," Ed said, easing the wheel with one hand. This is the second point. The ministry detects traces of magic in an area. They can't watch the whole world, of course, but they strengthen monitoring in places where underage wizards live. In wizarding households, it's fine. Ron's family has 5 or 6 kids, and there are other wizarding families nearby. If someone casts a spell, the ministry can't tell who it belongs to, so they don't chase every trace. But you're the only wizard in your neighborhood, so if any magic happens near you, the ministry will come looking for you. Even if I just happen to go near your house and cast a spell, the ministry will still find me? Isn't that great? Ed added wryly. This is unfair. Harry slapped the battered car seat so hard the old vehicle creaked. Ed didn't flinch. After a moment he said, "Why are you shouting? If the ministry wants to do this, what can you do? The current minister for magic is practically incompetent. You can't expect anything brilliant." All right, Harry had no comeback. He didn't know much about the minister except the name Fudge, and Ed's contempt puzzled him, but the picture was becoming clearer. The ministry's attitude toward wizards from muggle families was hostile. Harry, though a wizard, had been raised in a muggle household and now understood why Malfoy, as a pure blood, held such disdain for muggle-borns. It wasn't mere arrogance, it was systemic privilege built into how things worked. "So, Harry, do you understand?" Ed asked, shrugging. "There's a reason Malfoy is so smug. Most wizards, even if they won't shout about being pure-blood nobles, tacitly accept this system. Trying to change it? That's probably harder than defeating you-know-who." Harry agreed with the first half, but not the second. He thought of the terrifying Dark Lord, the one who had terrorized all of Britain, and couldn't believe changing a few ministry rules could be harder than bringing him down. Ed only smiled a little and said, "This is complicated. Honestly, even if I tried to explain everything now, you might not get it at your age." Harry blinked at the mature tone in Ed's voice. He was the same age as them, and yet he sounded far more knowledgeable. There was nothing to say. He shut his mouth. Ed continued, "When the Dark Lord was at his worst, he didn't just kill and torture. He also needed followers, a class of people he could rely on, the pure-bloods, and a step down, the half-bloods. The ones he oppressed were Muggle-borns and Muggles. So understand, Harry, many people at the time rallied to his side, and many still agree with his ideas. After his fall, those people didn't disappear. They went quiet and kept their views to themselves." The car rolled on, the road stretching before them, and Harry felt a new weight to the world Ed had just described, a web of inherited advantage and quiet loyalties that made the obvious injustices harder to fix than he had supposed.